Mhm. Well, welcome everyone to RU Live, formerly known as RU Hangouts. And as I said in the announcement for this meeting, this session, we will be including special guest experts from literally around the world because we can with the new technology that's available to us. And today we have with us a very special, very exciting guest, James Michael Smith, who I recently discovered as one of the very few Westerners reporting from the ground in China on what appears to be the decline, the end of the pandemic there, and China getting back, from what James reports, to normal, which was really the best and most encouraging news I've heard throughout this. This is the first time when I've watched James's videos on YouTube showing what it's like in China right now. This was the first time I've actually felt really quite optimistic that we will be through this in short order in the United States and in the rest of the world. Now, it's anecdotal evidence, of course, but there is some other statistical evidence to corroborate what James is reporting on. But James, why don't you first just introduce yourself, tell us what you do, who you are, why you're there, how long you've been there, what you're up to, and what you're seeing.
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me on, Thad. This will be good, I think. So I come from England, and I'm I guess a serial traveler. I've been traveling on and off for about 6 or 7 years, I guess. And China is the latest place on my list, I suppose. But this time I wanted to kind of really see if I can settle down into one particular country and delve deep into the culture. I've been here about seven months now. The day job is being an English teacher, but I would say my profession, my passion is in communication and filmmaking, video. I went to film school in England, and I'm interested in everything, and I like to relay those sorts of things. Interested in different cultures, philosophy, politics.
Indeed. Now
Yes.
you have a very particular take on Chinese culture and politics, which I find to be refreshing and original and in some ways brave. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. I think the bottom line is that Westerners don't know much about China. I think we have a very particular idea about what it's like, and also the way there's a part of it is lack of data, but then there's the framing of that as well. So you can describe what's going on here, but then you would have a completely different interpretation of that if it was happening in, let's say, the United States or Britain, right? For example, Western commentators like to talk about and point out wagging fingers about the Chinese spy state when the United States participates in this, just as much, and they extend their tendrils out into the world, and the NSA is spying on Europeans even. Having said that, I don't want to be mistaken for a supporter of the CCP. I think all governments have this tendency to want to seek power and maintain power and curtail individual freedom in the process. But I'm not looking at the whole China situation in terms of, hey, look at those awful Chinese oppressing their citizens, and us, we're the ones who believe in freedom, and we're just trying to spread freedom to them. I don't think that's a very naive point of view. For decades, the United States has been trying to, I suppose, establish their hegemony over the entire world, basically, and China represents a threat to that. So they will sometimes downright lie about what happens here, and sometimes a lot of the time it's just kind of like misinterpreting or the way it's framed, as I was saying before, and it's very concerted. So what I want to do is not in an ideological way. I think the ideology is a sort of a red herring, this kind of capitalism versus communism thing, because in reality, the people involved are not ideological. they're kind of Machiavellian. They want power, right? So what I wanted to do is kind of say, look, here's what China is like on the ground. It's actually kind of normal in many ways, and many things we identify with. And that definitely brings a kind of, once you do that, I find that you kind of break down some of these barriers and this kind of initial reflexive resistance to anything Chinese, which I have to say I was guilty of that before I came to China. I assumed that China was basically North Korea on steroids, and everyone's under the boot of the CCP, and they can't have any. There's no such thing as freedom of thought or freedom of action. When really, one of the biggest things is that China is incredibly capitalist. Mm-hmm. They are incredibly pro-business, incredibly modern, and there's an amazing entrepreneurial culture, which surprised me and delighted me, because it's absolutely fantastic. I find that is an expression of freedom. They have a thriving cultural scene, and they are in tune with the culture. It's not as if they have no access to the outside world. They are aware of the kind of things that we're talking about in the West. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to kind of communicate that a little bit. That's what I'm trying to do with my work with China.
So are you saying, so sum up what Western misconceptions of China are?
So I'd say that China's a fundamentally backwards culture, which I think is not true. Oh. Right. And this is reflected in the kind of, well, it's obvious that it would come from China because they eat bats, right? But then it turns out that this is kind of like a delicacy in some areas of China. It's not like a common thing. I've never seen anybody eat a bat. I've never even seen it sold. I've seen duck necks and duck bills, but in England we eat some strange things too. We have pig's trotters and haggis and all sorts. And every good English breakfast is the black pudding, which is basically a disc of congealed pig's blood. So how would you feel if you wandered onto Chinese social media, and then on Weibo, the Chinese equivalent of Twitter, people who were sharing pictures of English people eating black pudding and saying, see, this is why British culture is inherently dirty, a bunch of foreign devils, you know? And this is kind of how the narrative is shaped. And another aspect is what I was talking about before, that they talk about communist China. Yeah, okay, the party is called is communist, right? That's what they call themselves, right? But if you talk about a pure economic system, it's not as if this is like Marx's ideal vision. This is not the Soviet Union or North Korea. This is a mixed economy. It's kind of like a command capitalism, what's going on here. So that means not everywhere, and not to the extent that many people would like, is that there's incredible economic growth and opportunities for millions of Chinese people. And it's absolutely true that they've alleviated poverty for millions. But then the Western media reshaped that in terms of, oh, that's because they're forcing them. It's like slave labor and like 24-hour days in factories and things like that. It's like, well, okay, but let's not go there when it comes to the United States during the Industrial Revolution. And obviously you wouldn't expect the same kind of work standards for so many people when you're in a developing economy.
So you're in Wuhu, which
yes.
Describe it, and where is it, and what's it like?
So Wuhu is a city on the Yangtze River. They call it a small city, but it's a small city of about 3 million people. So it just gives you an idea of the scale of some of these cities in China. It's crazy. It's in Anhui province, and it's kind of situated halfway between Wuhan and Shanghai on the eastern side of the country, and kind of in the middle vertically. It was an old British colonial city. It was it's almost kind of like Hong Kong. It started out as a kind of fishing village and port, and then the British decided, oh, this is actually a pretty good, spot. So the oldest buildings in Wuhu are actually British. So you have the old consulate building and the customs house and things like that. And it's very famous for paper. But it's very beautiful and peaceful and friendly. When I was in Beijing, it was kind of like if you were in New York or London or something, like people like shoving you out the way, like, oh yeah, okay, well, yeah, whatever. But in Wuhu, they're very interested in foreigners. And first of all, you get the every day, but you get used to it. The looks like, huh? foreigner, which is fine. So you better behave yourself because you're not going to blend in Wuhu. They'll always know you're that foreigner. And they've also been incredibly friendly. That's another thing I must mention. There is this impression that Chinese people have been hostile to foreigners, especially since the virus thing has sort of been abating in China, and the new cases seem to be coming from outside. Now, there's been some suspicion towards foreigners, and I can tell you a story about that pertain to me. But overall, Chinese people have been incredibly friendly and incredibly open and welcome towards me since I've been here. So you mustn't just generalize based on certain stories,
And you've been there for 7 months, right?
Yes.
What's the story you were going to tell about you?
Oh, yes. So a couple of weeks ago, I was in town doing some shopping and I needed to get a taxi back to my apartment complex. And usually the taxi drivers are very interested and very friendly. And this guy was from the beginning, and he asked me where I was from. And then he asked me, had I been back to England over Chinese New Year? And I made the mistake of saying yes. I thought he was just interested, but he wanted to know whether I was possibly at risk. And he told me to sit in the back. So I was like, okay, I'll sit in the back. And then all the way there, he was asking me lots of questions that I couldn't. The thing is, my Chinese is good enough to get the gist of what people are saying to me, but I can't necessarily express precisely what I mean. So I had gone back to England for 1 week during Spring Festival, but since then I'd been in Wuhu for 12 weeks or something like that. But that's quite a difficult, complicated thing to explain in a foreign language if you're not used to it. There's like different qualifiers there. I'm trying to explain, yes, I came to Wuhu originally in September, and so I just looked suspicious according to him. So I got a barrage of questions, and when I finally got to the apartment complex, the taxi driver followed me out of the taxi and then had a very enthusiastic discussion with the guards at my apartment complex. Does this guy live here? Does this guy live here? And they were like, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, he's fine. And then he was like, oh, okay, bye.
But this was not an anti-Western animus. This was just concern about you being infected.
Yes, because when I first got into the taxi, he was very friendly and was interested in and generally curious about me. And so it was only after I told him that I'd been back to my home country over Chinese New Year, which was when this virus thing was starting to spread, that he started getting careful, suspicious. And I think that's the main motivation for this. It's not racism, like a lot of people have been interpreting it as, this kind of foreign suspicion that's going on. And I've heard of some places, and not just in China, saying that no foreigners are allowed in some gyms, some restaurants. But these are a few stories. It's not widespread. I've heard it happening in Vietnam as well. So it's not a uniquely Chinese problem. But yeah, and I think even if their applications are wrong, it's not fair to assume just because I'm a foreigner, I'm necessarily more at risk. and barring me from certain places is not right. Their motivation is not anti-Western, as you say. It's fear, and I think a lot of people are afraid. So, kind of like I can choose not to be offended by that, and that's what I've chosen.
So you've been there almost throughout the entire epidemic in China, except for 1 week, correct?
Yes.
When did it first become public knowledge in China?
Now, I think it was actually probably about the same time. Well, I heard it about the same time as you guys did, because I'm not in tune with Chinese social media or anything like that, or Chinese news. My language is not good enough yet. So it was actually just as I was leaving to go back to England that this thing had started to come out. And then it was a case of a new SARS-like virus has been found in Wuhan. That was mid-January. Mm-hmm. And at that point, everything was like, yeah, fine. It was only when I got back from England and I noticed I got to Shanghai, and this is the biggest city in the world. And I was in the middle, in the Bund, which is where you see all those beautiful, crazy looking futuristic skyscrapers that you see all the pictures of with the big spherical tower. And it was empty. And I was like, okay, what's going on here? And then I find out that travel restrictions are being put in place across different provinces. So I better get back to Wuhu. So I had to cut my Shanghai trip short and come back. And then after that, it was deep lockdown.
Okay.
Luckily, I came back and I was in my apartment. Otherwise, I have no idea what I would have done.
Yeah. So, first of all, explain or describe what the political economy of China is like on a daily basis for ordinary people, right? You were talking about this earlier, that we have misconceptions. We think it's sort of a North Korea type communist command and control economy. There's some command and control for sure.
Yes.
What does it look like as a regular, resident of China? How do you go shopping? What do the stores look like? What's available, what's not, what's banned and what's not, what's censored and what's not.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. So on the face of it, it's extraordinarily similar. So you can get pretty much everything you want in terms of shopping. You go to the supermarket and you could be in Walmart, and there are Walmart equivalents in China, and they're incredibly well stocked. It's not as if people are queuing up for bread, and it's a huge variety of things and lots of Western brands. And it's like you have all the Western franchises as well. You have the fast food restaurants, Burger King, McDonald's, some British ones. I'm amazed that they have certain things here. I think it's difficult to know what to say because it's very similar. I don't ever feel like, oh man, I wish I wasn't in this in this country. I can't get what I need. If I can't get what I need, I can get it from the internet. So they have the Chinese equivalent of Amazon, something like JD.com or Taobao, and it's like having Wish.com or Alibaba, but they deliver straight to your door like a normal product site. Okay. And they have, and it's all good quality. Now, that's on the surface level, on the ground. Now, you don't necessarily see all the distortions that come about through like a command economy, right? I don't see, shortages and things like that, which I'm sure there are, and there's probably an overabundance of some things. What I have seen is people talk about these ghost cities, and I haven't been to a full-on ghost city, but I have been to certain areas of certain cities where, for example, in Nanning, which is in the southwest, there was this whole complex that was designed like a European town, like Venice or something like that. And it had architecture in the style of, I don't know, like 18th century European architecture. And it had like little canals and boats, and it was all guarded up. It was all extremely well clean and well built, but there was nobody there. And apparently this was some boondoggle idea, like by some mayor or some high official, some big investment thing. Oh, this would be good to stimulate the local economy. Let's get some culture into Nanning. And the result was nobody really wanted to open a business there or open a restaurant. The reason why I was going there is because I knew some Italian people who had opened up like an Italian restaurant there, and we were the only ones there. So it was kind of really eerie and strange. So you see things like that, lots of white elephants. Other people, that's like when the government builds infrastructure that never really gets used and ends up just, taking up space and rusting. I went to what they call the Olympic Stadium in Wuhu, and that thing is literally rusting. It's spectacular. It's a 30,000 seat stadium, but why do they need a stadium? There's just not the demand there for like sport. That's the kind of thing I see. Have that in Western countries too all the time. There's every World Cup, every Olympics, they leave behind 8 or 10 white elephants that just sit there and or ended up getting reconverted into something else. So that's quite interesting. What else did you mention? There was something else I wanted to say about.
And then there's the big question of access to information.
Yes.
And popular culture. What's your access to those things as compared to in England or the United States?
Now that's difficult because I use a VPN, obviously, to be able to get onto Facebook and Twitter, and usually that's fine. But Chinese people use VPNs. I've seen it, and they do know. And many Chinese people at least have an Instagram. Like they love Instagram. So if they want to, they can find it. People have this idea that Chinese people, first of all, they're brainwashed. They're all brainwashed, and they don't get access to any kind of information. They all kind of think the same. You know what? They're individuals, and they have their own opinions, and sometimes their opinions don't necessarily match what the governments are saying. And they like it. They love to moan. The Chinese people, they love a good moan. So you can't control. I don't know how many people are in China now. 2 billion? I don't know. 1.5 billion people. You can't. It kind of overrates the power of governments if you think that the Chinese system is completely closed off. Having said that, I found that there's some movies and music that Chinese people are not aware of. Usually kind of older things. And I've actually kind of placed it down to stuff that was popular during the Cultural Revolution in the West. That's when they would not have had access to those sorts of things. I've met some Chinese people who have not heard of the Beatles, which blew my mind.
Wow.
From Jason, can a Chinese citizen research Tiananmen Square without digital obstacles?
I state that again. There's a question from Jason.
Can a Chinese citizen research Tiananmen Square without digital obstacles?
Great question.
That is a good question. That's the thing, though. It's with a VPN, sure, and it's not that difficult to get a VPN. There are Chinese ones. So on the the Apple App Store, if you buy a phone from China and you set your App Store to China, you can't download VPN or the YouTube app or anything like that. But I think you could probably change the country on the App Store. Then it's done. And there are sort of like things that are VPNs but don't look like VPNs, and Chinese have their own. So if that information is censored on the Chinese internet, which I would not know because I can't do a search for myself, maybe that's a good idea. Chinese people do have access to VPNs and can get into Google, and they are aware of what happened during the Cultural Revolution. Many of the people have lived through it. So there's no point censoring it because they're either their parents or their grandparents have lived through it, or they themselves.
Now, technical point, I'm only vaguely aware of what a VPN is. Can you explain that? I'm sure not all of us know what that is. What's a VPN?
Okay. I think the acronym is Virtual Private Network. I'm not sure. What happens is that it's a software that tricks the IP address to think that you're actually in a different location than you are. So it'll connect to a server somewhere else in the world. And so at the moment I'm connected to Japan. So I just pay a subscription. I use ExpressVPN. They're not sponsoring me. That's just the one I use. And you pay a monthly subscription. You can connect to different servers around the world, and the connection's pretty good. And you just click the button, and then you're able to access YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. What happens if you don't have an VPN is it just loads continually, like nothing comes up, or eventually it just says connection not established.
Most importantly, access to porn, is that available?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I can confirm. And pornography is heavily censored on Chinese internet, but they find their ways. I've heard they have their ways. It's like, yes, it's like, well, somebody tells you about the United States. Well, did you know that in many states that cannabis is illegal? What is it like to not have cannabis? It's like, what are you talking about?
Pierce has a great question. Pierce, can you unmute and ask the question?
Sure. Thanks, James. My question is, if somebody's caught with a VPN, or if I know I have friends that have come back to the United States from China, bought iPhones for their family, installed VPNs, and then come back into China to distribute the iPhones to their family. And I was just curious if there's any real consequences for being caught with a VPN or being caught with a phone that's pre-installed with a VPN, or is it kind of like a slap on the wrist, like something like a state where marijuana is illegal, but they're not going to put you in jail for it necessarily?
Yeah, thanks, Piers. I think this is so difficult to control from the point of view of the CCP that I don't know whether there's large-scale enforcement of this, because many people have VPNs for one way or another. And I've been around, I was completely careless, and I've been around officials, and they could see I was trying to connect to a VPN. And that was probably a mistake, but they didn't do anything, possibly because I'm a foreigner and I have different rules. Like, I'm afraid that my answer is not going to be too useful, because I don't know fully what I don't know fully what the consequences would be, and perhaps a lot of that information is not publicly available, like what exactly would happen.
You're teaching you're teaching English as a second language, correct?
Yes, to kindergarten and elementary school students.
And okay, so the little ones.
Yeah.
Are you interacting with their parents, or how many Chinese are you interacting with on a regular basis?
A lot, I guess. So my classes are 14 students in each class, and the parents are there in the beginning, at the end, and usually it's very English only while we're in the school. So I would say, give them the old ni hao, just say ni hao, something polite, and then not really say anything. Sometimes they can speak English and they'll ask me some things, about where I'm from and what I'm doing and this, that. Sometimes they want to know whether I've got the qualification. They're very concerned about their kids.
Yeah, no, you wrote, switching subjects here a little bit, back to sort of Western interpretations of China. You wrote an article recently about sort of Western discourse at the higher levels about China and having to do with foreign policy. You want to talk about it? I think it's a great piece, and you make a great argument in it. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I just remember what I wrote. So, the US intelligence agencies have been very explicit regarding this, blame China, and from top down they've been telling public officials and spokespeople to go with this blame China message. And this is part of a longer term anti-China foreign policy direction that the United States has been going on. And Trump himself is a China watcher. That's what we kind of call these kind of people. They are fundamentally suspicious about China. China can do nothing right. They're stealing our intellectual property. They're foisting their cheap goods upon us with slave labor and sending us viruses and things like that. But yes, but a lot of this, a lot of nonsense that's going around the virus is either intentionally or kind of like a second order effect of this policy. Like, for example, there was, so it started off in Wuhan, and then there was this picture circulating around Twitter that depicted a street, and it looks like hundreds of people just like dead on the ground. And the caption was, "This is Wuhan. This is what's happening in Wuhan. Why don't the CCP tell the truth?" And it turns out that this picture was of a German a protest in Germany for victims of some genocide. That was their demonstration. So from years ago. So that kind of thing. We've had the original video that came around saying Chinese people eating bats. This is why they're inherently dirty culture. Let's stop China. China must suffer the consequences. That was of a Chinese tourist in Polynesia on Chinese social media saying, "Look at all these strange things that Polynesian people eat." Things like that. So, and then there's the CIA report, which came out recently, which told the United States government that China had been hiding these recovery numbers. Now, it's plausible that China has been experiencing a lot more cases and deaths than is being reported. That's plausible, but we haven't seen the evidence for it. We've only been hearing rumors. So the first thing that came about was a report that Wuhan had been delivered thousands and thousands of urns. And this was supposed to be some kind of indication that, the death toll is way more than they're saying, because there's way more urns than what people died from the coronavirus. And then this was taken on by highly reputable news outlets as pressure grows on China as urn numbers suggest that death numbers are higher than claimed. But people on the ground were saying, hang on, Wuhan was completely locked down. And since then, people have died from many other ways, right? And the numbers reflect people who have died of coronavirus and all the other people who have died since then, right? If you only look at the people who've died of coronavirus, it seems excessive. And look, it's been 3 months in lockdown. Obviously, they haven't actually been able to get those urns in. So that counts as pure speculation. But the Western media grabs onto it and just runs with it, right? And then there was the thing about the mobile phone contracts. They're saying China Mobile lost so many subscribers over, and it was like millions. It's like, really? Do you think millions have died? Really? Because that's quite a strong claim that you need like real solid evidence for. But no, it's kind of like these cell phone contracts have been cancelled. You don't see that many cancelled. But then this was explained, well, no, China has been on lockdown. Migrant workers who come to big Chinese cities usually get another phone because they're usually tied to where you're working or living. Yeah. If you're not going back, you end up going back to your hometown over Chinese New Year, and a lot of them don't come back to work anyway, but especially because there's a lockdown.
Right.
They will have cancelled their other phones, or they've got another contract. And we're shifting over to 5G, so there will be some discrepancy in numbers there as well. And then there was the initial gentleman who first I can't remember his name now, unfortunately. The doctor who blew the whistle, the whistleblower, so to speak. They're saying, oh, they shut him up. Okay. So let's analyze this for a second, because it's not quite as simple as that. So that guy had not gone to official sources. What he had done was he had gone onto a private WeChat group and was sharing information about a possible reoccurrence of SARS. He wasn't saying this is a new virus. He was saying this is SARS. And this had caused panic amongst medical professionals in Wuhan. What the police had done was they brought him in to tell him not to spread rumors he couldn't verify. Now, that's a different way of putting it than they shut him up. They said, don't talk about this, because he hadn't discovered a new virus. He thought it was SARS, right? So, and they didn't want to create panic. So there's that. And then there's the director of respiratory and critical care at Hubei Provincial Hospital, and in Zhang Xijian. And on December 26th, she reported pneumonia of an unverified source to the provincial investigative head medical bureau in Hubei province. And they did a full-scale investigation into the hospital and gave her an award. Why isn't that story shown as well? Like, it's very one-sided. Mm-hmm. And once you just remove all the kind of nuance, this is not to say, big caveat, not to say that CCP are all angels and they've done nothing wrong and go communism.
Right. Very difficult. Let me stop you right there. So you have said a lot of things, I wouldn't say in defense of the regime, but you certainly are saying that it is far less of a totalitarian police state than Westerners commonly believe, correct?
It's more a case of it's qualitative, not quantitative. It's not a case of they're less oppressive than people think. It's more a case of just a lack of context. Okay. And listen, I'm a libertarian, so I think all governments are oppressive.
You blew it. Okay, I was gonna ask people what they thought your politics were. Because you could easily have been mistaken for sort of a socialist, communist type apologist for China.
Right.
James, did anyone please in the chat tell me what you thought his politics were until that moment? Besides, Christian says you're clearly a smart guy.
Oh, well, thank you, Christian.
Yeah, actually, I'm curious if people thought he might have been sort of not, sort of on the left here and sort of sympathetic to China in the chat, or you can even chime in if you want by speaking and unmuting if you want. I'm curious.
British, aka communist.
British is a communist, yeah. Says Joseph. Bill said, yeah, appeared that way to me, honestly, that you are pro-communist. Wow, keep coming, people. This is really interesting. Yeah, no, James actually writes for libertarian, which you write for a libertarian outlet.
Yeah, being libertarian.
Libertarian. But this is why he's so interesting, because he says things about China that libertarians don't say. In fact, very few people anywhere in American politics say these things. Your blazer screams libertarian, says Brian. Yeah.
I forgot my bow tie. I should have got the bow tie.
The fedora back in the day and the boat.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Noe thought you were a lefty and sympathetic to China. Yep. That's understandable. I think many people would have thought that about you. What else, people? Bow tie would have given it away. Yeah. So you're a libertarian who wants to say, I mean, what do you want to say as a libertarian about the Chinese regime?
What am I allowed to say?
Right.
So it's definitely more subtle than it used to be. It used to be very much a case of, I can't believe that the Chinese people put up with that kind of thing. They should revolt. But it's just not pragmatic. I think so. I'm an anarchist I'm a full-on, screw the government completely. I don't think it should exist, but it's kind of like it's a philosophical anarchism. It's not to say we should be working for an anarchist society right now. It's a kind of an analysis of the world. It's a way of looking at the world in which you see the individual versus the state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So from that point of view, yeah, of course, I do believe the Chinese people would be liberated without the state, but it's kind of like you have to look at it in the context of first of all, a lot of this very paternalistic view of Chinese people comes with it a certain foreign policy prescription. So a lot of people, well, the Chinese, don't you believe that the Chinese people should deserve liberty? And they go, yeah, of course. Well, then we better give it to them. Let's, we need regime change now. It's like, whoa, hang on. Before I was a libertarian, I was always anti-war. And so I'm very sensitive to these things. When I see these kinds of arguments, I always just get my spider sense starts to get tingly. You want to like invade, don't you? You want to at least, give money to an opposition party to see, get a cheeky coup d'etat going on or something like that. And these things are often cause way more destruction than possibly could have occurred if you just kept the regime in place. Look at the Middle East, for example. Who could honestly say that the Middle East is experiencing, with a straight face, quantifiably more freedom than they were before? And even if they do have certain things that they didn't have before, was it worth the cost of millions of lives and the disruption and empowering extremist groups and things like that? Always bear in mind the law of the unintended consequences with these kinds of things. I'm also skeptical of the kind of universalistic, here I am, the white savior coming in to give these people democracy because we know best, right? Here's what I want. If China is to experience liberty in a real sense, it has to emerge. It can't just be enforced by some foreign power. We will give you liberty. And I find that the West's view of China, even if it's just a sort of on the ground level, it kind of contributes to this mindset, this very imperialistic mindset that I'm not a fan of. But look, I don't like governments, and I'm not a fan of communism. I just wish people would stop calling me a CCP defender when I do these things, or a communist. I spent half my life arguing with communists on the internet.
I'm sure you have. So let's get down to it. Let's talk about the pandemic, okay?
Yeah, right.
And your recent video, in which you basically just took your camera outdoors and walked around the streets in Wuhu.
Yeah.
Right? It's very well done, by the way. Everyone should go. In fact, you should post or maybe you can post your YouTube channel URL right in the chat so people can go watch it after this.
Could I ask a quick question before we get to that, by chance?
Yeah, Landry, go for it.
So actually, I was an exchange student at Tsinghua University in Beijing in the fall. I'm wearing my Shanghai. This was the big NBA event when LeBron James went over and he didn't criticize China and all that. So,
right.
Anyways, I'm kind of curious about because my roommate was literally like a party member. You know, he has those monthly meetings that he had to go for everybody on campus. Like if their party members they literally have to write. He told me he'd tell me about how they would have to go and the whoever was running the meeting would give them whatever the latest things Xi Jinping would say. And basically they'd have to write down on a little piece of paper what their thoughts of it was. And like, I was like asking him, I was like, what if you don't agree with it? And he's like, nobody ever disagrees with it. You just write that it's good. And I'm just curious of what is your approach coming from a similar political background, like anarchism and libertarianism. How do you bring those ideas or like develop them in a way with like local people or Chinese people? Because it's such a foreign concept. Like when I'm talking about Hong Kong and like the idea of it, like even Hong Kong is just it really shows how much of this idea of freedom is so culturally backed and the different ideas of what a government should do. And it's very hard, like you're almost speaking in a different language in a political sense when you're talking to locals, as I found.
Yes. I generally don't talk about politics to native Chinese people. So there's that. I have a hard enough time trying to talk about libertarian ideas, even not just anarchism, but generally speaking, libertarian ideas to British people, because that at least Americans have a sort of cultural context for it, right? They have a historical backing for it, and their whole political system is couched in terms of natural rights and freedoms. Right. But a lot of it is not just with China. A lot of it is not just the CCP. It's their whole culture, right? They don't think in terms of individualism. It's more particularistic, and it's not universalistic. They don't say everyone has the same sort of like inherent rights. They don't think that way. It's more the group comes first, and you're kind of a cog in that wheel. So, of course, that doesn't really make sense. So it's kind of. I would feel like I haven't really had that many political conversations with Chinese people. So I would probably rather appeal to basic humanity, something deeper than just politics, right? That's what I'm trying to do with my videos.
Right, because I found even with the people that are quote unquote more Western or more open to Western stuff, like because I'm kind of interested in the idea, there's the idea that, for example, like rock and roll brought down the Soviet Union. And then when I look at China, and I've met plenty of people who I go to clubs with, who are dancing to American music and stuff like that. And for me, just on my own individual experience, I didn't see much of like the most free, gay, all these things that I thought would make him politically different and maybe not have the same ideas that his grandparents and his parents do. It didn't seem to be the case, at least in my own observation. That's why I think it's the younger generation of China is really interesting about how are they going to differ, especially from what their expectations of life are, but also their expectations of what the role of everything in their society is supposed to play.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. Yeah. It's Chinese media, I guess, is very concerned about the westernization of China. So all these influences, markets, money, music, culture, and they're importing some of the sort of things that in our culture, like the social justice stuff. That I've seen that as well. It's quite interesting. So I think this will be kind of, but they'll end up growing up and then they'll end up becoming party members, and then those ideas will start seeping into the general political culture as well. They talk about politics being downstream from culture.
Right.
So that if there is sort of to be a revolution here, it'll be kind of like that. I think it won't be an armed coup d'état as much as the CIA one. Anyway, I think your comments are very interesting, even if my answer wasn't that enlightening. So thank you.
No. It's I deal with the same problems of being over there, and also having there's so much that Westerners just don't understand about China fundamentally, or there's so many generalizations or things that are taken out of context that you have to deal with. I mean, just look at Japan and look how the Japanese and Korean economies developed. They were so copying and stealing from America. Yet we're not going to argue that Japan is not an unfree place. Japan has freedom. It's just in a very different sense of things, right? This collectivized form of freedom, and to expect a Western style of freedom from China is just, I think, very culturally incompatible, and as you said, imperialistic at its core. It's way more.
Well, we're not at war with
people.
China. We're not at war with Japan at the moment, so that changes the whole narrative completely.
Right.
Yeah.
So
good, Landry.
Maybe this is for you and Landry. I mean, the big question for Americans, and certainly for the Trump administration, although I guess the Trump administration is sort of answering it in a way. And this is not really your field of expertise. I understand this, but you both studied China and Chinese politics. I mean, should we be? To what extent does China pose a threat to us? And if there's a threat, what kind of a threat? What do you take to be the intentions of the regime there? And what are also, and this is sort of a secondary question, what do you find to be the general opinion of Americans among ordinary Chinese? And
so the first
American people, the American government, and American culture, the three things. What do you think? Because you spend a lot of time with ordinary Chinese, both of you guys, maybe not with government officials, but so let's start there. What do you take to be the general Chinese opinion on the ground of those three parts of American culture, American society?
Okay. First of all, one interesting thing is I think culture is pretty universally loved, in my opinion. I went to Dandong, China, which is on the border of North Korea. It's a place that still has veterans living from the Korean War. I mean, if there'd be a place where there'd be antipathy towards Americans, I thought it would be there, because people directly lost their lives because of Americans fighting there. So I was afraid. I was going to call myself a Canadian when I went up there and I was speaking Chinese to these people. And I tested the waters with this first guy that I met, and I was asking to him, and he asked me where I was from, and I said I was American, and he's like, "Oh, I love Transformers. I watched Pirates of the Caribbean." He's telling me about all these things that he's watched and all these things he's seen. But I think on a cultural level, I think there's music, movies, all these kind of things are there. I don't know if I don't know how much of it translates past that and the ideals behind our culture and things like that, but it's definitely the presence of the culture is there. And then for government, it seems to me, from my own observations of speaking politics with Chinese people, is that I could see them in essentially two categories, which are a lot of them are purely just apolitical, because they recognize even if I did disagree, what could I do? It's if the bare minimum, what we can do in the US, right, is maybe write a Facebook post talking about how Donald Trump's a fascist. In China, if you write that, it gets banned and censored immediately. So it's the bare minimum effort, not even organizing, not even talking to other people, just the bare minimum effort, is going to be futile. So for most of them, it's I'm going to focus on my education. I'm going to focus on getting a good job. I'm going to have children. I'm going to produce a family. So they're very much focused on the individual as far as what is within the realm of possibilities for them to do around them. So there's that one camp of people who are, I think that's a big portion of them, but they're just apolitical because they basically by necessity. And then there's a portion that are they either because their parents are party members or for X or Y reasons, they are political, but basically hold the party line and say party opinion and whatever the state media basically says. There's probably more grays in between those, but those are I think two big camps, at least I had experience with when I was in China.
Okay.
So.
James, what do you think? What's your
Yeah, I agree with Landry on that, and he's added some things that I didn't really think about. As far as the Chinese regime is concerned, that's difficult to put it. They're not. I don't perceive them as imperialistic. I perceive them as self-preservationist, and they couch it in terms of self-preservation. And if that means having to extend beyond your borders to kind of stop or at least dissuade Western powers from disrupting their supply chains and their interests, then that's seen as legitimate. But I find that normal people are very pro-Western and as per usual, not at wind with the general way of politics, and want to be open towards the West, to America, to trade, to share cultures and ideas. And they're fascinated with the West. They're absolutely fascinated. They love foreigners when they come. They want to ask loads of questions, and they love our music and our movies and everything. It's not the case that they all see us as foreign devils.
Right. And many of them have been here too.
Yes.
Yeah. So
they travel.
Right.
Yeah. And they have a lot of money these days.
Right.
I think on the state itself, I think this is something I think is a major importance for people to understand that haven't been to China or don't know much about China, is that you have to understand that what China and how they see themselves today is purely built and baked into 200 years in the past history. So China, in Chinese, to say China is Zhongguo, which means Middle Kingdom, basically. They saw themselves for 5,000 years of history as the central part of the earth, central part of the universe. Everything revolved around them, right? They had this image that they were the most powerful, and they were. They most innovative. They had all these ships that went all over the world and so on, and trade. But then what happened is that you have imperialists from Britain to France to Germany that come in and basically slice up China into spheres of influence and take portions of it. And then you have a local power, Japan, which was submissive to China for its entire history. And then that comes and takes over China. And then you have civil wars within China. So for so long, there have been basically foreign powers holding control in China. And you can see this today. You go to Shanghai, you can go to basically the ritziest area to see where they had the first Chinese Communist Party meeting in Shanghai. And across the street from it is a Lululemon and a Louis Vuitton store. It's ridiculous, but you go inside, the whole museum is telling you basically how the mythology of it's the nation state belief, basically, right? Is that the Han people, the Han ethnicity, we are this and we have been conquered, but now it is because of the CCP that we have our own sovereignty back and our own freedom. And it's this museum itself that you literally go through it and you're like, oh, this is how they're charting the story. Because that's in the 1990s, Chinese education, well, more so 1980s, when the Cultural Revolution died off, you have Deng Xiaoping, he comes to power, he's making reforms, he's opening up China. The Chinese state education turns from a Mao-centered education all around basically Marxist ideas to a more holistic 5,000 years of history, where it's like it's a more nationalistic approach to education. And then that like nationalism is bookmarked at the very end with foreign oppressors, basically, from Japan to European colonialists. So that is like a lot of what carpets support for the CCP and people within the CCP is this kind of nation state idea. And on the other page of this, to talk about, is China a threat? I think the most instructive thing I've ever seen coming out of China is when Xi Jinping and Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba and the richest person in China, both went to Davos, Switzerland, to the World Economic Forum in 2017. Both of them were, like Jack Ma criticized the United States of spending $14 trillion in foreign wars, wasting money, not building infrastructure in their own country, and that's why their economy is behind, and that's why America's going to fall behind China. You basically told America straight to their face what we have been doing, which has been wasting money on foreign wars that have not even accomplished anything. And then on the other end, Xi Jinping was talking about we need a globalized multilateral world. So for them, I think it's, at the very least, they want a place in the global stage. I don't think that's an empire. I do think that is economic influence, especially with the Road and Belt Initiative, which is their investments from everywhere from Italy to Greece to Africa. These major loan and debt projects they're having where they're building up countries' infrastructures, including their internet network with Huawei building up, which there's a lot of talk about, do they have backdoors to that and whatnot? I don't really know about that. But, they, at the very least, they want regional hegemony just as a sphere of influence. They want to be the biggest player in Asia. And then on top of that, I think they just want a recognized and respected role in the world like they have had for 5,000 years of history.
Back up a second. So I cut myself off. We're going to get back to the pandemic in a second, but let's.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No. You brought up the Belt and Road Initiative, which is fascinating. And for those of you who don't know, the Belt and Road Initiative is this monumental project undertaken by the Chinese government over the last, 5 or so years, right? To essentially integrate at least economically, everything from the Pacific coast of China, as you said, all the way to Europe and into Africa, through building, through various ways, roads, tunnels, bridges, ports, and communications infrastructure, right? Now, if you look at a map, and those of you should look this up, it's quite a thing. There are many articles written. You can look up maps of the Road and Belt Initiative. It looks like an imperialist project. It looks like China's attempt to exert at least economic hegemony over that whole hemisphere, or hemisphere and a half, actually. And there have been many people who have been nervous, even me at times, that is certainly could be the setting the ground for, military mobilization, for political conquest, because once you control the bridges and the tunnels and the roads and the shipping and the communications in most of Asia and much of Africa and even parts of Europe, all the way to the Atlantic coast in Europe, and that's how far it goes. I mean, that's something that I think foreign policymakers are very nervous about, and it's not like they're completely crazy, are they? James?
No, I don't think so. I mean,
Which part?
sorry?
Which part do you disagree with?
Oh no, I don't disagree.
Okay. You think it is a potential threat? You think it is a potential threat of real political and military imperialism on the part of China? That's all I care about with China. So long as they keep producing stuff and selling goods on the market internationally, I have no problem with them. If they But if they want to go the route of the United States and Britain before them, France, et cetera, and the Spanish way before them, and other empires, and the Chinese also, and the Japanese at times, if they want to exert different kinds of hegemony, like direct control, either through economic pressure or direct military control, then we have a whole different ballgame. And Donald Trump sounds like he might be correct about these things.
Yeah, I mean, my worry is that China may pursue that kind of thing because they feel like they have to in order to compete, right? And yeah, of course, that's definitely something to worry about. I don't know that much about the Belt and Road Initiative, so I can't comment there about that much.
I think one thing to consider is that, well, one, I think from the China's perspective, I don't think they were having as much success as they would want from this project in general. There are a lot of reasons why I think they're in certain countries, like in Africa and with Iran, that they're being successful, is because basically capital from Europe and America are just not going into those places. And if they are, they're always with conditions. Like they're about human rights, or you have to have this many women or girls in school. There's all these conditions that come with American foreign aid, where with China, it's very much not so. It's very clean cut, which a lot of people in these countries do like. But on the other hand, with like issues like Huawei, which America did ramp up and basically gave like Germany an ultimatum and all these kind of different things, that we wouldn't give you foreign intelligence basically if you adopt the Huawei network. So there's that kind of stuff. But with bullet trains, for example, like people thought, like, I went on the bullet train. It's 4 hours from Beijing to Shanghai. It's the fastest train in the world. But there's a lot of issues when they bring that to other countries, that Japanese companies, for example, are still beating them as far as getting deals and being known for their quality control, right? So there's a lot of aspects of like the infrastructure, all these kind of different things. And then maybe when other African countries are seeing what's happening to some with debt control and different things like that, that might make people more aware and privy to what's going on. So the idea that I don't think it's going to be as easy for them to accomplish this. I think it's Xi Jinping basically trying to bake this. It's his big project. It's like Donald Trump's wall to him, basically, where he's just it's a big idea that even if it doesn't get accomplished, it places something in the minds of Chinese people that we will basically we're providing the world for this infrastructure, we're becoming part of the world, and the world is going to come to us. All these roads lead back to China, basically, right? That's what the point of this project is. So
I hope so. Okay. Finally, COVID. We're going to get to this. So John S., you want to ask your question? You want to unmute and ask your question, which is the question I think many of us have, and certainly the one I have.
Yeah, I was just wondering, is it back to normal? Are they doing temperature checks on people, like leaving buildings or something like that, or entering, that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, generally speaking, I found that things are getting back to normal. So if purely from the point of view of before, during the lockdown, this city was dead, and there was no traffic, and there was hardly anybody in town. In my apartment complex, they closed off all the gates but one, and made us register on a card to prove that we lived here, put all our contact details down. They checked our temperatures as we were coming in, and we could only leave for, I think, max 2 hours, and we had to tell them what we were doing. So we'd have to say, okay, I'm just going to the supermarket, or I'm going to work. So now the checkpoints are basically gone. There's still one gate. We can only leave out of one gate still. But all we need to do is show this card that shows that we live here, and we can leave for as long as we want. And they've stopped taking our temperatures. And until a few days ago, they had this tent here to just check that we lived here. Now there's just one guy who checks people occasionally. So slowly, they're starting to relieve some of these controls. Now you go into town, and it's now really busy. It's packed. I think what's happening is that I've read a bit about this as well. What the Chinese people are doing now is retaliatory spending. They have been deprived so long that they're coming out, and we're going to go shopping. We're going to do everything.
Good.
And the Yellow Mountain, which is local to me, apparently, it's packed. People are starting to go on trips and stuff again. So the Chinese people at least believe that things are getting back to normal, and they're willing to go back to normal. It's kind of all been keep calm and carry on from them through this whole thing, and they've responded in kind as this thing is abated. You still have to, sometimes in malls they check your temperature. So it's one entrance to a mall, and they buzz you with one of those gun things, and then sometimes they'll just show you the temperature. They don't note it down or anything. They just show you it. So there's your temperature. It's like, okay. And in some places I've had to put down my phone number and how long I was. I went into the pub the other day, and I had to write down my phone number. So they keep a record of everybody who's been in, and they ask you, if you're having any symptoms, please tell them. And then they let everybody know who put their name down that one of the customers has symptoms. So please be careful. In some cities, they have an app that is compulsory. Not here, but you have to sign up and then report your health condition, and it keeps a track of your location. And that way, I think there is some really large-scale monitoring in Shenzhen with this kind of thing. So this is kind of dictated by the apartment complexes. Everyone had to download this app and then report their health status. We didn't have anything like that, but it's very high tech. It was sounds amazing, really. But the Chinese state reports, and I get these news updates on my phone from China Mobile. It is state-sponsored news, but so take it with a grain of salt. But they say that. So yesterday they had something like 36 new cases, but they were all coming from abroad. So they're people who have come back to China within the past 2 or 3 weeks that have been in quarantine, they've been tested, and it's been found that they have contracted it. And then the other day, there was one native case in Guangdong province. So they're still reporting new cases, and they haven't had any deaths for a number of days now. I'm not sure how long. So yeah, that's the way they see it as well. The state actually said, a state spokesperson said through this news, is that they don't expect to be 100%. Like, it's not a thing where you can just say, okay, everything's fine. They said we'll be in a state of vigilance, I think was the word they used, for many months to come. So it won't be a case of, oh yeah, don't worry. It's people will still be careful. People are still wearing masks.
Yeah.
People are still kind of observing basic social distancing and good hygiene. But you see out people doing things, and you see it on my blog, like people are out playing badminton, having fun, doing the normal things they want to do.
But are most people back to work, and are most businesses back open?
Yes. And I go back to my
Hallelujah.
school tomorrow. Yeah. I mean, it's great. We should be saying, yeah, great. But the first reaction of Westerners is, oh, well, they're probably lying. It's not true.
Yeah, because you're seeing it with your own eyes.
Yeah.
So we're talking about less than 3 months back to economic normalcy, essentially.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
This is from China, everyone. This is the origin of the thing. So what we're talking about for the United States is, roughly June is what we're looking at. We should be back up to normal, at least economically, by June, shouldn't we? If we follow the same course.
Well, here's the thing.
Maybe even
I find these predictions that it's going to be like a year. I've heard crazy predictions like that, and I don't know where they're getting that from. Even if I think they might be assuming just continual exponential growth, which is just not how epidemics work. Even if you're not doing social distancing, eventually, the virus abates by itself. That's kind of what happens. And that's what seems to be the case. And it's happening in Japan and South Korea as well. It levels off, right? So it's not just China who are coming out with these positive numbers, right, and things sort of getting back to normal, right? But I don't want to be overly optimistic, because the way that Western countries have been approaching it has been different. So, and they're experiencing problems. So I don't want to falsely reassure everybody and pretend I have knowledge that I don't. But I take it as a positive, and I see it here, and it's great. The schools are back open next week as well.
It's amazing. I take this as a huge positive. Okay, we have a few questions, and then we're going to go private. We're going to stop recording after the questions, and then I want to see everybody's pretty face. So, Ken, go for it. You have a question. You can unmute and go for it.
Yeah, I don't know. I missed the first half of the conversation. Maybe you already touched on it, but I'm wondering, what is the perception of the Uyghur ethnic minority? And I've been hearing some stuff online, some stuff on Reason about it's like re-education camps they're putting a lot of the Uyghurs into. Reason also had an article on some ethnic Kazakhs in the west of China that was sued to something to do with a meteorite that they had wanted to keep, that the CCP took away from them. Are you guys aware of this stuff?
So I don't know anything about the meteorite. That's new information to me. But I haven't discussed. This is not the kind of thing I'd like to discuss with Chinese people, the Uyghur situation. But what I can do is I can tell you what the Chinese state's interpretation of what they're doing is, because they're fairly open with it, but they think it's completely benign. They think we had some terrorist problems in, I can't remember the name of the province, but it's where the Uyghurs are, the western border province.
Xinjiang or Xinjiang?
Xinjiang, something like that, yeah.
Xinjiang. Xinjiang.
Yeah, thank you. And in response to that, they cracked down on a lot of things going on in that province. But they perceive what they're doing with the Uyghurs there as a positive. They perceive it as, we are helping them integrate into China. That's what they say. They say the re-education camps are to train them for work and for to properly integrate with what it means to be Chinese. They're quite firm, but they're Chinese, even if they are Muslim, even if they're ethnically Uyghur. So what they do is, and then what's the term that they use? It's a very politically correct term, but they help them go to other provinces to work. They're migrant workers, right? Now, I have heard other things that seem legitimate about. They call these camps voluntary, and apparently they can leave, but they get followed. So, and their families being harassed. I've heard that. But they're allowed phones. It's not like a prison. It's they live in relatively good conditions. This is what I'm hearing. The thing is, the information, it's so difficult to get proper information that this is basically what I'm just kind of like hearing through the wind and the research I've done on it. And then what else was I going to say? Something about the terrorism, but it's gone now. Anything else you'd like to ask?
Yeah, Brian has a great question. Back to the quarantine and the lockdown and the virus.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's any limitations on size gatherings. So they're saying, hey, you can have this restaurant open, but maybe only half capacity. Are there limitations on size, or are they like, hey, movie theaters are open, concerts are happening, and sporting events are happening? Because sort of the discussion here is like, yeah, we're going to flatten the curve and things are going to level out. But as soon as the NBA is back, it's just going to shoot back up, and we're going to have this like, second wave. Is that something? Are size of crowds being limited there?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So it started off with complete lockdown, no restaurants open, no bars open, nothing. And then they were slowly relieving some restrictions. It got to, you're allowed in, but you can only, there's a certain distance between people who are sitting within the cafe. And they're slowly relieving some of these things. There were, it's difficult to know because I don't get the Chinese news. However, I've seen the restaurants are opening up again, and now there doesn't seem to be any restriction on how close people can be. And I'm not sure about sporting events. I don't know about that. But first, with the restaurants, you could go in and get it takeaway. So first of all, the entrances would open, and there would be like a table there, and you could write down what you wanted, and then you could get what you wanted. And then they let people in, but you could only stay a certain distance apart. And then they pretty much opened it up. They just opened up cinemas again last week. I'm not sure about sporting events. So kind of staggered.
Is there any talk or concern over there about a second wave? Because that's what we've been hearing here, is that like it's going to come down the summer, but around fall we might have to do this all over again, maybe to a smaller extent in the fall.
Yes, there is concern about that. Yes, and I think that's where the state was coming from in their eternal vigilance comment. First of all, they were concerned about cases coming back into China from other places, and it seems like that's a valid concern, because that's where the outbreak is really hitting its peak in the West now. And if you could definitely foresee a second wave happening if they had not stopped all travel. So for people who don't know, they stopped all travel to China now, basically. But before they did that, maybe 2-3 weeks ago, they were having everybody who coming into China was basically forced to be quarantined. So they would come in and you would pay for it. I think at a reduced rate, but you would pay for a hotel for 2 weeks, and it would be a room to yourself. You would be given food for your money, but people would come, knock on the door, leave food by your door. You'd come and get it, and then you'd give the rubbish to them later. And they come and test you occasionally. And for a while, that's where all the new cases were coming from. But as it pertains to coming back to school and stuff, that is another thing. But they're eager to get going and see. It's kind of like a managed experiment. I think that's where we're going at the moment. We'll see what happens when people start coming back to school and coming back to work more often. At the moment, we've still seen no new native cases apart from that one guy the other day.
Great. We're getting close to going to the non-public, private, non-YouTube section of the programming tonight. Are there any other questions for James? You can either raise your hand digitally or you can put it in the chat.
I'm curious about, so you teach English, right?
Yeah.
One thing I've read about is that, in China, they have the 4-2-1 problem, which is because of the one-child policy. For every one child, you have 2 parents and 4 grandparents. And for the child in particular, it can be overbearing. And the way, at least I know China does it, is that parents will go to work and then maybe grandparents will bring the child to school and pick up the child from school.
Yep.
I've heard of cases where some grandparents literally will stay and watch teachers teach English to their children to see if it's good or whatever. What have been your experiences or things that you found odd while teaching English in China? I'm curious.
The stereotypical Chinese hover parent.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I've seen a little bit of that. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, they're very, very concerned about their children's education and making sure they're getting the best standards and everything like that. They'll lots and lots of questions, either to me or vicariously through the Chinese stuff. They're not allowed in the classroom, but they will. But they will look in the lobby and sometimes just watch over the CCTV. And we do, before they come in, we do demo lessons. So for free, we will do a lesson to kids who want to sign up, and then they'll have a chat with the sales team afterwards to see if they want to sign up. And the parents are pretty, they're very, very, it's kind of like a critical, yes, but completely understandable. The thing about Chinese parents is they have this, the stereotype is, oh no, you will be a prodigy. We will, you're going to be good at everything. You're going to be a brilliant pianist and a great dancer and a brilliant maths genius. I found that as much as they work their kids hard, they play hard as well. In Chinese malls, it looks so much fun. There's actually so much for kids to do, and they treat their kids. They're spoiled little brats, like just like Western kids as well. So that's something that surprised me.
There's a Chinese saying where they call them like little emperors because of basically how big the generational difference is of like people growing up with these luxuries that their grandparents didn't have, that they see them, the older generation see their children as so spoiled and having all these opportunities that they would have never had, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Very cool.
I guess a part 2 question, I was curious about like private education in China. I've read about this where it's, because basically there's some people for one reason or not, they're sort of excluded from public services. And sort of there's some places where the neighborhoods will collectively put money in a pot to basically buy English teachers. I don't know if you've heard anything about this, but I think there's around 50-something million children in China that are privately educated.
Wait, Landry, we had to cut you off. There was something wrong with your audio.
I got the beginning of the question, and then the sound like blew out, and I've got no eardrums left.
I muted him. I'm gonna unmute you, Landry. There was something wrong with your.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Good. So sorry.
Go ahead.
Basically, I was asking is that I've read about people who've been excluded from public services will pool money together. They'll buy English teachers. Have you seen anything like that or heard anything about that? I don't really know much about it. I know it exists, and there's a large portion of children educated privately, but I don't know how that happens in China and what form it takes place in.
Yeah, I'm afraid I can't shed any light on that because I haven't heard of that myself. So good question, something to look into. Yeah, interesting.
All right, Ken, I think you're got the last question there.
Yeah, more along the lines of coronavirus. I heard somewhere the epicenter was what they call a wet market, where they have, you know, a lot of animals available to be kind of butchered on the spot. And the working theory, at least at the time that I read this, was that that coronavirus had jumped from a bat to a pangolin, which is kind of like an armadillo type creature, and then to a human. And the underlying kind of economics of this is that these kind of exotic animals that are available to be butchered and eaten for food, there's a perception that it's, you know, just the poorest of Chinese who eat these animals because it's, you know, what they have available, but that this is actually not the case. It's traditional Chinese medicine values these kind of obscure exotic animal parts and meat. So I'm wondering if you're hearing anything from Chinese state media that's targeting either the wet markets or the kind of the demand for exotic animal parts as in relation to the coronavirus.
I haven't heard anything about that topic from the state media. Like, it's all been very much focused on how we're going to deal with the crisis, that sort of thing, and very little about the wider issues about Chinese society and why these wet markets seem to be hotbeds for viruses and things like that. And then as you rightly point out, the implications as far as deep cultural issues about Chinese medicine, whether this is really, you know, compatible with the modern world, it's very interesting. But Chinese state has been cracking down on some of this. In Shenzhen, Shenzhen is like their big melting pot experiment. It's like the special economic zone to allow freedom and free trade to go through, but it's also kind of that they're trying to modernize that part of China, and they basically got rid of all the wet markets there, and so they are aware of it, and also it's kind of, they're very hyper aware of how they're perceived by the West, and so Xi Jinping started this policy of a countrywide upgrade of all the public toilets in China. And because that's one of the biggest complaints Westerners have when they come to China, is how gross the toilets are. And believe me, 9 of the top 10 worst bathrooms I've ever been have been in China. But Landry's nodding. So it's kind of, it's on their radar. That's what I'm trying to say. But in terms of the wet market specifically, as regards to Chinese traditional medicine, I haven't heard anything about that.
Okay, good. All right. This has been incredibly illuminating. We think we have a great China correspondent on our hands, maybe 2 of them with Landry and James.
Yeah.
I've just learned so much from this, and the questions have been fantastic. We are now about to stop recording, so this will end the portion of this that will go on YouTube, and we're just going to go to a private session where everyone is free to show their face, and I'd like for you to do that. So if you're watching on YouTube right now, that means you're not a Renegade University member, and if you want to become a member and join these discussions in the future, and by the way, Thursday's special guest will be the great Daniel Coffeen of Unregistered Fame on this. So if you want to come on the show on Thursday, Are You Live, join Renegade University, go to renegadeuniversity.com, and I'm about to stop recording. Thank you, James, but stay here, everyone stay here, and we'll just talk privately among ourselves.